Okay, everyone, we are leaving Roosevelt and moving on to Harry Truman, which is number 33. And I want to review our song again because it's been a while since we sang it together. So let's see if we can say them all. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk and Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant and Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush and Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Donald Trump. Okay, there you go. You can back that up if you want to go over it again. All right, now, some pictures here for Truman. We have that he is 1945 to 1953. So he takes over the rest of Roosevelt's term, which is pretty much a full term, and then runs again. So he pretty much has two full terms. He's a Democrat, and his vice president was Alben Barkley. There's only one here because remember he was the vice president, so he didn't have one in the first term, and then Alben Barkley comes in when he runs again. And his nickname is Man from Independence, which basically shows his kind of common background, that he was just kind of a very down to earth, kind of normal person. He didn't come from a very wealthy background. His dad was a farmer, and he had just known work most of his life. The buck stops here was a phrase that he was known for, and this plaque even was given to him to put on his desk. And the whole idea was, I really like, because it means that whatever decisions he made, they were his. He didn't try to pass them off on anyone else or blame them or say, well, this person didn't do their part, or they didn't do this, or they didn't do this. Whatever he decided, that was it. The buck stops here, meaning I am responsible for my decisions. And it was a reminder that the decisions that he made at that desk were important. I put this picture here of he and his daughter playing the piano because they were both musical. His daughter loved to sing and wanted to make a professional career of singing. And he almost became a professional pianist. He was pretty good at it. And he did play the piano several times, even while he was president, for different people. And I put the picture of his daughter there because they were a very close family. They only had the one child, and the three of them, people in the White House referred to them as the Three Musketeers. They were always together. There was one story of how the people that served them came in to serve them the next course or whatever at their dinner, and the three of them were found throwing bread rolls at each other around the table. So they were just kind of they were a very close-knit, tight family. So let me tell you a little bit about the FLOTUS, the First Lady, Elizabeth Truman, but everyone called her Bess. She even went by Bess as a child. I thought this was cool when I saw this about her grandmother, that her grandmother was an orphan from England. So her grandmother on her mother's side. She was raised from a pretty prominent family in Independence. She was raised in the same town that Harry was for most of his life. He came as like an elementary student, and they knew each other from the time they were little. He even claims that he only courted, which means dated, one girl for his whole life, but they didn't really date until they were grown. But they went to the same elementary, same high school, and same Sunday school together. Her dad tried different things. He always wanted to kind of get into politics, and he tried to be accepted at this position and that position and this one, and never really was very successful. They lived her most of her life by her mother's parents in the same town, and she spent more of her time at her grandparents' house than probably at her parents' house. And she wound up living in that house for the rest of her life. That was the house that she and Harry came back to after the presidency and lived in and made their own home. She was considered probably a little bit of a tomboy when she was young. She was athletic. She enjoyed outdoor activities. She loved sports. She was into, I think, tennis and basketball and baseball and pretty much anything. She liked horseback riding. She liked outdoor activities like hiking and fishing. It was just something that she was very athletically active. When her father did die when she was kind of young, and she took over most of her household responsibilities. The mom had a very difficult time adjusting. She was the oldest. Bess was the oldest of 5 children, and so she moved back in. They all moved into her grandparents' home, and then she helped take care of all of the other children and was very good at the responsibilities of the household, watching the money that they spent and that kind of thing. She had already been dating Harry, but then when World War II broke out, he went over as a soldier. And so she wanted to marry before he left, but he said no and that it would be better to wait in case he had came back with some injury or something. While he was gone, remember the influenza of 1918 was spreading across the whole country and the whole world, and she got the Spanish flu. She survived, but it caused hearing damage. For the rest of her life, she lost some of her hearing. She married Harry when he returned from World War I. They had one daughter named Margaret. And I don't mention a lot on here about her, but I want to tell you some interesting things about Margaret. Margaret wanted to be a professional singer, and she even tried while her dad was president. She didn't get some very good reviews, and in one review that the guy kind of said that she wasn't very good, that it didn't really add anything to the song, and blah, 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 blah. Harry Truman wrote him a letter and basically was lambasting him and saying, if we ever meet, you'll have a black eye. he was known for saying what was on his mind and defending his family and his daughter. And but that never really caught on, but she did wind up being a writer. And she was the one that wrote the White House book that I told you about not long ago that I read. She wrote about the White House. She wrote biographies on both of her parents. She also has some murder mystery series that are based in the White House, like Murder in the Roosevelt Room, or Murder in this room, or Murder in the Red Room, or whatever. So she has a series of murder mysteries and became a well-known writer herself. That was the other thing I wanted to tell you. So she has this in common with one of the Roosevelt children. Elliot Roosevelt, which is Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt's son, went on to write some murder mystery series also. And in his murder mystery series, Eleanor was the one that solved all the crimes. So she was not an official detective, but she got involved in all of the mysteries and solved them all. So his were all based in the White House too. Murder in the Rose Garden, murder in this and this and this and this. And Eleanor wound up solving all of the murder mysteries. So 2 presidents, that's interesting. 2 presidents' children went on to write murder mysteries based in the White House. Interesting. Okay, so This was one thing I learned about Bess that I thought was really neat. At almost every job that Harry had, she was right there with him. She worked in some capacity, whether she got paid or not. She was an advisor. She was a bookkeeper. She was an accountant. She wrote a lot of his speeches. She advised him in lots of different things. She was the manager at the store that he tried to start, that we'll talk about in a little bit, right when he came back from the war. And so even when he was in politics, he even at one point, she was advising him and reading his speeches and helping so much when he was a senator that he put her on the payroll. And there was some controversy over that because you're putting your wife on the payroll. But he said, she does as much as anybody else here, and she really is doing work and helping me. So I thought that was cool that she was involved so much, and he really did listen to her. Like I said, they were close, and he would talk to her about what was going on, and she would, sounds like from what I've read, that she actually, instead of just giving her opinion, she actually did the research and would read newspaper articles and would understand what was going on at the time and then give her advice based on what she felt was right. And many times Truman took her advice. So, as First Lady, I want you to picture the scene. Exit Eleanor, who was like super First Lady. She probably deserves a cape. She did everything. She wanted to be out in the middle of um, of everything. She gave press conferences, she gave interviews, she was on the radio all the time. And here comes Bess, who does not want to be president, or she doesn't want to be first lady. She was even upset when he was the vice president, and she was like, what's going to happen if he dies? And it did happen. And so she was not really happy about this. She did not want to be first lady. She never gave a press conference or a full interview. The only time she ever gave an interview on TV was after their presidency in the 50s. Her daughter did the interview. Her daughter led the interview and taped it, and it aired. And everyone in that interview got a little bit of a taste of what she was like, because she was so quiet and so reserved. That she just almost seemed sour, that she just had this kind of mean resting face on. But she just was nervous in public, and she was worried about what people think, I think, and so it was difficult for her. She lived in Independence most of the summer doing her normal household activities. Anytime she could, she left Washington and the White House and went back to her home and tried to go grocery shopping, tried to work in her garden, tried to cook her own meals, but she got exasperated with the fact that the Secret Service was always there, that she could never do anything alone. She had been used to driving her own car, which was not extremely common for a woman at that time, but she loved to drive herself around, and she couldn't do that anymore when she was First Lady. And that was one of the first things I think she enjoyed doing again when they were done in the White House. The one kind of thing that happened that brought her some negative light in the White House was that she accepted an invitation to a DAR reception. Remember the Daughters of the American Revolution that Eleanor came out and resigned from because they would not allow Marian Anderson to sing? Well, she accepts an invitation to one of their receptions because she accepted most invitations that were given to her. But it happened almost right at the same time, same day as they declined, they discriminated again another black performer, and this black performer happened to be a senator's wife. And but she didn't know about it when she accepted, and then she got she got a letter by the senator to her saying you should decline and you should not go. And she said, no, I was given an invitation, I accept it. I hate that your wife didn't get to perform, but I am going to this reception. And I think this basically showed her inability to see the power of her position. So, see the difference. Eleanor realized that she had the ability through her position to either condone things, that means approve, to approve things by going to certain things, or disapprove by showing her disappointment, like resigning from the DAR. And I don't think Bess truly recognized that it was a big deal. Like, what can I do? What am I saying? I'm just going to their reception. I'm not condoning them, I'm not approving them, but really the position had more power than I think she realized. And she was not using it in the same way that Eleanor was. She was doing her normal duties. She took care of the meals, and the meals were good when people came, and she went to a lot of receptions. She supported lots of different groups, but she didn't really have one cause or one thing that she was basically an advocate for. Like I said before, she served as the president's advisor on lots of different issues. Um, After World War II, she signed a housewife's pledge to set an example to conserve food so that it could be sent to Europe. So, all of those places in Europe, even though war is over, they're damaged, they're destroyed. They still don't have food, they still don't have an economy. And so, she led an example here. Here, she is kind of recognizing the importance of her position. Maybe it just took her a while to realize this is in the second term. And so she signs this to send food over to Europe. She supported 2 Girl Scout programs that were sending help over to the people in Europe. Clothes for Friendship sent clothes, and schoolmates overseas sent backpacks full of supplies. Like I said before, they were a very close family. During the second term, Bess's mother moved in with them in the White House because her health was getting worse, and Bess wanted to be able to take care of her. And right towards the end of their term, her mother died in the White House right before they left. She was very happy to return to private life. She was glad. They were glad to retire, and for the most part, Truman did. He did speak out. He did support a few people for president, but he didn't officially really go back into politics. He really did retire. She is the longest living first lady. I think that's interesting, and she died at 97 years old. So the longest living. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Truman. I've already told you some, so we can go through this a little bit faster. He was raised in his father's farm in Missouri, so he knew what work was. He knew what living on a farm was. He had a basic high school education, was not an extraordinary student, but did enjoy reading and enjoyed history. He had poor eyesight from the time he was a little kid, so he couldn't participate in lots of the outdoor activities that the other kids did because his glasses were so expensive at the time. They were not as common, and his parents basically didn't want him to participate in sports because they were afraid of his glasses getting broken. He wanted to go to West Point Military Academy but couldn't because of how bad his eyesight was. He gave up music lessons and a career to go to work after his dad went broke. So when he was a young man, he was planning on going either into college or continuing with his musical career, and his dad didn't have any money and went broke in all of his businesses, and so Truman went back and worked at lots of different jobs. A timekeeper for the railroad. He worked at lots of different kind of odd jobs to help and earn money for his family. He served in the Missouri National Guard for several years, and then when World War I started, he served in the regular army. That's wrong, not during World War II. During World War I, and he became a major in the army. After the war, he started a haberdashery. Do you know what a haberdashery is? Hat store. He started a haberdashery in Kansas City with a friend. After a few years, though, there was a recession, national recession, meaning the economy went like this. and his store failed. Now, one thing I learned, and this is cool, he could have claimed bankruptcy, and when you do that, you don't pay back your creditors. You lose some ability to um, borrow money and go back into business and stuff, but you don't have to pay that money back. But instead of declaring bankruptcy, he repaid his creditors, the people that he owed money to, over the course of the next 12 years. He eventually became a judge in the county and then a senator, and Bess all the time was supporting him and encouraging him, even though it scared her a little bit because it sounded a lot kind of like her father, who was trying different positions. He eventually became vice president. While he was president, the White House had to be completely remodeled. Like the floor was falling in, the ceiling almost caved in, and so they found that the structure was falling apart. So they had to go in and do a complete kind of renovation where they laid foundation and fixed everything. And while that was happening, they lived in the Blair House, which was across the street, so a lot smaller than the White House, but still able to entertain and conduct business from that place. He was known for his plain speaking and for the phrase, "the buck stops here." He died in 1972, and I think he lived about 20 years after his presidency. Bess lived 30, so she outlived him by about 10 years. One last thing that I wanted to share with you was Truman started the National Day of Prayer in 1952. There were other presidents who had done a day of prayer, but had not instituted it as something that happened every year. And he did, and Congress signed it, and it passed in 52. And I read this from one of the books I was using, that this was one of the prayers that he said daily for himself. He was mostly, I think, some Baptist. He mostly went to the Baptist church, I think, when he was president even. And but this is the prayer, and I really liked it, so I wanted to put it here and read it to you. You do not have to copy this down, but I wanted to read it to you. O almighty and everlasting God, creator of heaven, earth, and the universe, help me to be, to think, to act what is right, because it is right. Make me truthful, honest, and honorable in all things. Make me intellectually honest for the sake of right and honor, and without thought of reward to me. Give me the ability to be charitable, forgiving, and patient with my fellow men. Help me to understand their motives and their shortcomings, even as thou understandest mine. I thought that was cool. And then the last slide here is another quote I liked. When he ran for the second time, the newspapers thought that his opponent had won, and they already printed "Dewey defeats Truman." So here he is laughing when the results come in, holding up the paper because he did win. At this moment, I have in my heart a prayer. As I have assumed my heavy duties, I humbly pray, Almighty God, in the words of King Solomon, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this thy so great people? I ask only to be a good and faithful servant of my Lord and my people. So, like I said, it's hard to know people's hearts and to know, are they truly trusting in Jesus or not? But this at least seems to be someone who is revering God and honoring Him and has a proper, or possibly a proper, fear of the Lord. So, Truman is an interesting one, and we'll get into his events tomorrow. In your comments below, mention something that you thought was interesting or a question that came to mind that we can look at together.